A very good morning, dear attendees, and welcome to the 11th edition of Adrenalin Thought Leadership Webinar Series. Adrenalin Systems Limited prides itself on being the leader in the HR tech space. The past year has shown the increasingly important role that HR is playing as a function and also becoming an integral player in business strategy and decisions. We're all about having conversations around this new role. To this effect, Adrenalin hosts thought leadership webinars where we invite stalwarts to share their thoughts and working models on a topic of their choice, which will greatly benefit not only the community but also organizations. Today's topic is a much awaited one, Budget 2021-2022. The budget was presented yesterday in the Parliament, which comes at the end of a pandemic. To break it down for us and unlock its importance, we have with us today Dr. Indira Ananth, who is an economist and policy researcher, a consultant, and visiting faculty based in Bangalore. She is the board member at Center for Budget and Policy Studies in Bangalore. She has authored several policy research reports and a book on macroeconomics. She was a faculty member at ASCI Hyderabad, XIM Bhubaneswar, and LIBA Chennai. It is great to have you with us today, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you.
Attendees during the good morning, ma'am. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine.
So, attendees during the course of the webinar, if you have any questions, you can key them in the panel in your right. There's a questions panel, so you can key in there, and we will answer them at the end of the session. And yes, I hope you have a wonderful session, ma'am. The session's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Very good morning to all of you. I'm happy to be here to be speaking with you on the 2021 budget. I'm also very thankful to Adrenalin to be giving me this opportunity to be speaking to you, all the professionals there in the field. I bring to you what I understand as an economist about the budget. It's a very straightforward budget in the sense that there are no surprises, as we have read in all the newspapers and the immediate reactions to the budget. But there are a few interesting things that have happened in the budget. But I have focused on understanding what the budget is, what the mechanism is, and how we have come to be doing that during this particular session. So the main agenda that I would be discussing today are in 4 parts. The first one is the changes that we have seen in 2020, what has been in the last 1 year, the challenges that India faces and which have come to be magnified, so to say, in 2020. The state of the economy, here I have used the data from the economic survey, which was released on January 29th, and the government would have used this as its reference point. There is also the 15th Finance Commission report, whose prognosis of the problem would have been taken into account. As also as the finance minister has herself mentioned, there were more than 170 detailed meetings with the various stakeholders in the economy to realize as to what is to be required to be done in this budget. And of course, the budget itself, as to the basic numbers, as to what has been given to us, and what are the policy statements that the government is looking at in terms of taking this year forward. Just to briefly recap as to how things have changed, we as people, common citizens of the world, we can see that there has been quite some fundamental changes, as also rethinking on many of the issues. The first point itself, as we see, it's a kind of a debate between or within our own selves, whether we are fast tracking into a new world or are we going retrograde in terms of our behaviors? So the 5 6 points that come to mind immediately when we look back on 2020. 2020, as we know, is used to give us an understanding of a perfect vision. And so there seems to be some clarity on how we could discuss the year that has been. But the first point itself is one of sustainability. And that, as an economist, I find it very interesting because the debate about what is work and what is economic activity itself was very much highlighted during the year. And it also brings to a fundamental question as to what economic activity is. Do we need economic activity at all? Or could we manage if we had a collective action and a thought process where the society is able to work together amongst itself, or the various people among the in the society doing their own jobs? So that's the first point. We have to look back on sustainability. In fact, many of you would have seen, but the blog by Frizoff Capra, and where he very interestingly wrote a letter from 2050, looking backwards as to how 2020 has changed the thinking of the world itself. So it's about as if the future of the work has arrived faster than ever before. And it has brought with it lifestyle changes, changes in consumer behavior for the marketing professional, so to say. And in economics, if you were to look at the way the modern economic world was looked at, the whole concept of consumerism itself, the question of needs versus wants. And we realized that we were able to manage with the basic needs or the essential requirements that we wanted. And we were becoming very innovative about achieving some of our goals. And we also realized what were the wants that we could do without. So the question of consumption or consumer behavior is what got highlighted. The third point was rethinking on technology adoption itself, and that is where the fast tracking comes. In some sense, some parts of the economy have fast tracked into the newer world in terms of technology adoption of automation, robotics. Those are issues that we were always thinking will happen in another 5 years' time. Whereas there is a retro in terms of the renewable energy, in the sense that we saw a point in time in the last year where oil became, there was a zero price to oil, and the oil companies were in a kind of a situation where they really wanted somebody to pick up the oil because they couldn't let the rigs not doing any work, and the whole world was flush with oil. All the ships on the seas, almost all the oil tankers in almost all the countries on land had oil, and there was a unique situation where nobody expected that oil could be of zero price. And so that brought us back to the concept of renewable energy itself. Could we do something in our own backyards to improve that goal of reaching self-sufficiency? The fifth point is about global versus local, in terms of whether we would want to be a global citizen where we still continue to deal with a multilateral world, have international trade, or is it better to be protectionistic in the sense that we are able to do our things on our own as a local, where we promote our local manufacturers, our own local kirana stores, our own trust-based society, as we say? Could we look at that? And the last one, most important, I think, in an economy which is now governed by so many factors, the classic example of a conflict between an institution versus individual in terms of the governance structures itself. How much of an institutional capacity is to be built? How much of a rule-based economy do we need to progress towards? And how much of an independence does an individual have? Does he have the freedom that he thinks he has to run the world? And a very typical example itself is about the administering of the vaccine itself. Even if the vaccine were to come into play and it is available to everybody, there is a point now where you have the conflict between an institution and an individual, where the society at large would say that we should be vaccinated for the betterment of everybody and to the people we come in contact with. But there is this reasoning that we have about the freedom about an individual making a choice about the vaccine that he wants or not to be vaccinated. So there are these fundamental shifts that we see in the thinking that's happening in what we understood as a society, which is based on economic power or economic give and take, and how it is going to be taken forward. Keeping that in mind, we can look at, in an industrial framework, the changes that COVID-19 has brought about. And this is, I have referred to the World Economic Forum report that they had a few weeks back. And we see that the first things that struck us was about the auto industry. Nobody was traveling. There was a total lockdown, irrespective of the class or the work position that they belong to. And suddenly you felt travel seemed to be a far off thought. And the auto industry, what will it do? But we see that it is down, but it's not out. We will be coming back there. So the automobile industry is quite happy to be there. Then the restaurants, about having to, the food catering industry that we talk about, there are new innovations in the menu because there are these gig economies that we are talking about, people who are cooking at home and sharing their food. There are those who decided to be fully at home, not buying food from outside. And so the restaurants, which were also a very, very important human activity where there's a lot of contact-based industry, there are new innovations in the menu about how to keep your hygiene levels and also to have new ways of reaching out and doing business. The third is healthcare. Now, this is a mixed bag. We find that if it were in the private sector, there are those who are in research who are looking for new medicines and new vaccines. And there are the others in the public sector who are trying to reach out and reach to the last person, the last mile connectivity. But then in an Indian context itself, if you look at healthcare, the positive has been that you could deliver at a distance. So we hope that the future of the industry would be towards e-consultancies, which has started to be noticed and where people are happy about it, where you don't need to reach out to a doctor physically. And in fact, the public sector, I mean, the public hospitals were at had come to a time when they were not looking at they were looking at their resources being fully utilized for the COVID cases rather than the others. So delivering at a distance is the norm now. Then the insurance industry. For once, I think the realization has come that we will have to insure ourselves against any new calamities or the dangers that are prevailing in a changing world, or the suddenness of change that happens in a society that can come about. So the insurance industry has gained that level of prominence. Then the banking industry, the digital decision making has actually paid off because for once we realized that we need to have a currency which can be done digitally, not in terms of digital currency in that sense, but to be able to do a banking service digitally. And for once, I think that has fast forward into the present. And in an Indian situation where about 40% of our people are still unbanked, that is a situation where we are moving towards a newer world, and the adoption to banking systems is definitely going to be taken up with a more open mind. And the last one, education, again, something which can be ranked high up if you were looking at it from the social sector side, or else in terms of the overall understanding, education could be from various angles. And so there is this learning to adapt, and there are new ways of dealing with it. Here again, if you were to look at the Indian situation, the outcomes have been pretty poor for some, whereas for the others who have been able to adapt into the newer technology have moved on to online education. And that is a business opportunity for those who want to be in that. And there are the innovative solutions at the public policy local level, where we saw and heard of some cases in remote villages and corners where teachers in public schools had an open mic system in the center of the village broadcasting their lessons so that most of the students could be covered and they could do it in a staggered manner for all the classes. But then what you would see is these are industries overall in the world who are having different ways of managing their systems and moving towards a newer world. So these are the changes that we see that has happened. But then why is the pandemic different from a war or a financial crisis? And I just thought I'll just put it in a very small table form. And if you were to look at only three factors, the demand, the supply, and the production, you see that in a war or a financial crisis, the demand is heightened during a war. In fact, we have seen in the recent past, in the 19th and the 20th century, when an economy was to be further energized, countries have gone to war so that they can further kick the economy to a higher level. So demand is heightened. Of course, it could be that the supply is affected for a short time, but the production increases. It is for more special purposes of meeting the needs of the soldiers on the front, and also for those who are at home trying to do different things. And so the whole population gets energized into being in the economy. So the whole economy as a whole, whether male or female, they tend to come in together, and there is a heightened sense of production. Whereas in a financial crisis, there's an overall lull. Demand can fall, and it falls for the rich or the poor, irrespective of the class that you belong to. But the production continues because there's only the supply also continues. The demand has fallen because you're trying to readjust your system. So that's in a financial crisis. But what is so different about a pandemic? In the pandemic, the production stops. There is a lockdown. There's a stop fully, and the supply is affected because those of the stocks of the inventory that exist continue to be available, but the demand gets suppressed because there may not be a clear case of a demand being able to fully be satisfied, nor the supply which is there to be reached to the consumers. And so, how does this happen? There's a sudden lockdown, and you could see it from two sides, from the production side and the labor side. If you were to look at the production in the first instance, you see that the production stops, supply falls, prices increase, and so there is a dissaving, so to say, from the producer's end. And so they are now wary of what the consumption is going to be and how much it will fall. Coming to the labor, either you could be laid off fully, or you could be going in with a wage fall where your say wages have fallen, but definitely you will now start to look back at your income level, and so your demand falls. So there's an overall decrease in income, and there's a saving. So you are going to dip into whatever savings you have, and as the discretionary consumption falls, you find that the production of the wants, so to say, decreases, investment falls, and the overall income falls. So this becomes a cyclical situation where some industries which can survive the weather will be in a cyclical form, or as we saw just a few minutes back, there could be a structural rearrangement of the society per se. And this is where you could recall the article that Arundhati Roy wrote in Financial Times and on April 2020, where she called the pandemic as a portal. The portal becomes a new change where we could, as Indians, move from one world to the next. So the pandemic could be used as a portal where we could shake up our situation to move to the next world. So that's another way of looking at it. And what did we do in our present situation in the country? We had the Atmanirbhar package. We got 3 tranches, a total of about 25 lakh crores. A trillion is a 100 lakh crore. So if you look at it, that was the amount of money that was given to us during the Atmanirbhar package, and it was given in various under various heads to help in terms of direct benefit transfer in the initial stage, then about the health care, then about the recovery plan for the various sectors. So they had detailed subheads under which the package was designed. And if you then look at the Indian challenges now as to going forth, how would the budget now in the current situation be looked at? What are the challenges that you have? Basically, the first one is the poverty and inequality. I mean, the haunting images of COVID-19 in 2020 for most of the sensitive souls that we could see that is about the walking images of the migrant laborers from one end to the other of the large country that we have. And there was a response which was slow from the government in the initial stages. It seemed as if they didn't realize that so many people were there, and they didn't know the exact numbers, they didn't know how to reach them. And so that is the haunting image that you have. So can this lead to a reverse migration? Will people come back? That's one of the challenges for my industry. And then the second one, the urban versus rural. I mean, definitely all of us would want to see an urbanized world in the Indian context, but the sheen is of the urban reality. I mean, you see that there is a feeling that maybe if you were more rustic in your ways of life, you could still have managed the challenges. But in an urban world, it left you very alone and naked. And so the sheen seems to be off there. Then but you have the worsening educational outcomes, the falling health parameters, inadequate housing, and the widespread unemployment that we have. Nearly 400 million workers lost their jobs, and we still haven't come back to the pre-pandemic times. There are still about 50 million who have fallen off and who would find it very difficult to get back their jobs. So what's the challenge that we have? The first one we all would recognize is to get the demand back on track, create employment opportunities, revive the animal spirits, because the businesses have also felt the pressures more than ever as to whether people will buy back goods. There is a pent-up demand. I mean, that is what we are all hoping for. But would that be sufficient to realize the coming back of an industry? And they would definitely need credit. So how do you improve credit? There is a lot of credit in the society. There is liquidity in the economy, of course, and to raise the spending level without raising prices, because we know, we could see that the consumer price inflation index definitely rose because of the fact that the supplies did not reach the market in time, and so there was hoarding in some cases, but the demand fell also. And in fact, the wholesale price index, if you were to compare it with the CPI, actually fell because many of the in fact, we should be aware that the agriculture had a bumper harvest this year, and so there was food grains available, but it could not be reached to the market, and so the farmers could not sell it, and hence they actually got a bad price. So that's the other opposite. So India is a land of contrast, and there are different pressures that one has to look at when you are looking at the various factors that are affecting it. Now, post-lockdown, what would it be? Even if the demand improves, one is to need to check the prices, because the shortage of specific skilled labor due to migration, wages can increase. The physical distancing and other measures that have to be taken will make definitely that the cost will increase. And of course, a reduced or limited use of capacity. Now, this is something which people are discussing, like in the context-based industries of travel, tourism, sports, film industry. But this would still be a matter of concern when people will not fully be accepting the relaxation of being able to move to crowded places. So that's the post-lockdown venture. Now, this is so what were the expectations of the major sectors in the economy? We could see that the banking and the financial sector wanted to have a bad bank which could look at the NPAs, the non-performing assets, to be taken care of, and a recapitalization of the banks so that there could be more credit available. Insurance to be open to FDI so that there could be more business that could be done. Then we had the manufacturing or the expansion of the production-linked schemes that were already there. This, of course, came after the Atmanirbhar package also. And they were looking at more on tax rate moderation, MSMEs, promotion of gig economy and platforms. Health and pharmaceuticals, because generally we have seen over a period of time that our expenditures on healthcare in the overall budget has been anywhere between 1.3 to 2%, and the National Health Policy itself in 2017 had said that we should reach up of about 2.5% of GDP on a constant basis. So we hope that that would be taken care of. Then the retail policy. So there is a requirement of a national retail policy to counter online sellers, because those of the economy could manage, took to e-commerce and buying online, but there were a lot of people who were dependent on the local kirana stores, and the kirana stores themselves were handicapped of being able to get the supply. So and definitely the trust-based economy that exists between the homemakers or the households and the local kirana store is much, much stronger in terms of the interest and the menu that they would want to have. And so the requirement or the challenge for a national retail policy is pretty high. That is what they were expecting. Then the real estate and infrastructure, because they wanted a tax relief and to have some curbs, regulations which would look at construction. As we know that construction is one of those most visible, tangible change that we can see in an economy when construction is going all around, and which has a direct impact on our core industries of steel and cement. Then again, automobile, their requirement of a production linked incentive scheme, the policy on scrapping, support for electrical vehicles. Aviation, again, a contact base where you have lower taxes on aviation to buy. So that, I mean, that's one of the worst hit, and I don't think it has fully come back to the pre-pandemic level, and it would take some more time. Then tourism and hospitality, where they expected more liquidity support with low collateral and minimum moratorium. That is what they wanted. Now, keeping that as the background, what is it that the budget is and how have we gone forward? I mean, that's the next phase that we can look at. Budget, as we know, the initial slide, if you remember, it said what's in the bag. And basically because the budget comes from the French word bouger, which is basically a bag and a bag of coins, so to say. But it's nothing like that. I mean, it's more of a ledger statement where you're looking at the balancing of the accounts of the budget. And it's an annual financial statement. And why do we have it on an annual basis? Basically because we have promised ourselves under the Constitution that the government will give us a clear picture of what we have in terms of the receipts and the expenditure that the government will put forth to the citizens of this country. And so we have to do it as an annual exercise. It also is a political roadmap. It's a policy statement by the government in power, by the political party which is in power, to say how they would want to steer the economy further down the road. And so we, as researchers and analysts who have been doing budgets for some years, there were a few points that we were always discussing and which are different in different times. So the major changes that have happened and which all of us would thought would be the main things that and no more could come. One is the change date and time, which happened, which of course again from an NDA governed government at that time, that the budget was in the evenings at 5 p.m. on the last day of February, because that is the time when the House of Commons in London would sit in the morning at 11 a.m. And so that was a vestige of the pre-independence time. And so rightly enough, it was changed to the mornings on February 1st. The shift of 1 month, nearly 30 days, is also because now the accounts are in your hand and you're better able to make your numbers for the next financial year opening on April 1st. So that is the realization. So that's an important part of it. The second is the merger of union and railway budgets. Because the railways, if you remember, used to be given a day earlier. And this again was a historical fact, because railways was always considered to be on par with defense, the iron framework which connected the whole of the country, and so there was more of the interest in railway budgets. But right now, because it's also just another logistics in terms of our transport, they have been merged, so we only have a single budget. The more important one which we were discussing was between the plan and the non-plan expenditure, which have now come to, there's no distinction anymore. And this is an important concept because the whole idea of this plan and non-plan expenditure started with the way India designed its mixed economy, where we had these 5-year plans, which we adopted from the USSR economy style. And so we used to have this distinction between plan and non-plan. What that which is planned for in a given year would be giving the capital expenditure statement in the plan expenditure, and the non-plan would be all of your salaries and maintenance and establishment costs, which would be put under separate heads. And it would have worked perfectly, but the only problem is there were always some time run and over cost run. And so none of the plans that we started would be completed within the given time or within the given budget. And so they would overrun, and that would again fall into the non-plan. So if you were to look at a outcome report, and you would see then there was no match, because there was always something which was planned and that was not completed, and that overran into your budget. So this distinction was thought that it was not be correct to understand the outcomes, so that was merged together, so we don't have. The next step together now, we have a digital budget, which of course forced by the circumstances, we have a paperless budget to it. That's a new thing now. But typically as a researcher, ideally a budget would only look at the tax proposals, in the sense that there won't be any hype in the budget anymore, so we don't need this exercise at the end of the year. And so it would look upon a stable, a certain kind of a schema, and there's clarity in what you want to do for the next few years. So the budget could be a document which will give you this, which will present to you the stability of the government in its policy statements. Is it holding on to what it promised in its manifesto when it was politically elected? Number one. Number two, does it give you clarity of what it's doing over the years in which it is going to be in power? And three, the certainty of the proposals that it has over the next few years. So this is all that the budget would want to look at. And so in that sense, has this budget delivered? I mean, that is one of the touchstone that we can look at. So what is it that the Indian economy is looking at? It has been seen that the major shifts in the Indian economy will come from the farm sector, the renewable energy, the ICTs, the startups. Then, of course, the supply and value chains, both domestic and global. Then definitely a recognition that infrastructure is a multiplier of growth. Then which will be the drivers to take care of this? Human capital, basic education and healthcare, increasing productivity, exports and global value chains, tourism and food processing. So these two are basically some of the thinking that is happening closed doors in the RBI and the government, and these are the ones that they have recognized. You could go back and check on this, because these are available in the lectures given by the RBI governor too. So if so, then how does the economy look like at this juncture? The state of the economy, as the economic survey was, the expectation is that there will be a growth of 11% into the GDP. Is this a very big number? Unfortunately, no, because if you look at the low that we had, 2020 was minus 24%. And as a simple mathematical exercise, if you look at it then, if it's 100, then 24% fall is about 76. Then again, a growth on that would reach you somewhere around 82, 92%. So it's not really a big rate. Then now, if you see the final document, it says about 14.4% growth is what they are expecting. So you're barely managing 2% growth in the year. It's a V-shaped recovery. That's because the pent-up demand that we were talking of hopefully will strike, and so the green shoots that we are seeing will continue to grow. And for us, the positive savior has been agriculture last year, which has showed a positive growth of 3.5%, unlike all other sectors of the economy, which showed a negative. And much of it has been held by the Atmanirbhar package. That's what the economic survey also shows. And the graph that we see here on the right-hand side also shows us the food grain production and the procurement. So to that extent, we have had some surplus food grains available to us, and so we are in a happy state. But then the growth in the core index, as you can see, has been really falling, and this is where that V-shape we are expecting. It happened in April 20. This is till November 2020. Now we hope this goes a little higher, and definitely it should be on the growth path. That is what is expected in terms of the growth index. But what is the thing that we all are looking at, which we are a little more sensitive about, is about this that when we look at the GDP and we look at the four components, it's about the consumption plus investment plus government expenditure and the balance of payments. And you see that the gross fixed capital formation that we could think of in the economy has actually fallen. And if you see the colors here, the private fixed capital expenditure is green, The government fixed capital expenditure is in blue, and gross capital formation is gray. So you can actually see that the private fixed capital expenditure has fallen over the years. That means the investment from the private sector has fallen. It's been on the down. And the only saving grace is a government fixed expenditure. And in this year, especially, that's the only one which kept the economy up. And then with respect to our international trade, again, the sorry state of affairs is that we have been having a negative balance of payments over a period of time, the net exports. Why is it positive this year? Because our imports are down. I mean, that is the thing we are. So that is the point that definitely comes to being if one were to look at the economy as a whole and what could be done in such a scenario. And if you were to look at the GDP, then, I mean, the gross domestic production that we were looking at, which is basically the C plus I plus G plus balance of payments, then we could see that on a current price list, that if you were to see the nominal GDP that you were seeing, this is the growth pattern that we have seen in the last 3 years. And this year, the expectation was supposed to be about 149, that is about 1.49 trillion, but we have come down to about 1.34 trillion. That is our GDP that we have seen in 2021. That is what we have been able to achieve in terms of real GDP. Real GDP is about 1.34 trillions. That is what we are. Far away from the 5 trillion that we are asking. The aspiration is to have a GDP of about 5 trillion and an inclusive growth. Seen from that end, we find that we have a lot to catch up on. That is what we are looking at. So how has it been in the past 1 year? You could see the major numbers here in terms of how they were in April, November 29-20, and in a comparative scale in April to November 2021. And all of them have shown a dip in terms of their numbers. I mean, the tax revenues definitely fell. So the total expenditure also fell. They were not able to complete what they had set out to be. And the fiscal deficit increased. So because the government had no revenues, it had to borrow from the market. And so that is the situation that we have. So what is the government actually looking at? And I come to the budget per se now as to what has been presented. The finance minister, I'm sure most of you would have gone through the budget, but I thought for a quick understanding and a better discussion on this, I'll just put it forth for you. The 6 pillars under which the government has looked at the way the policy would be taken forward are these 6 pillars. So in the first pillar, if you see the health and well-being, definitely there has been an increase in the health sector outlay. You could see the jump from just about 99,000 crores last year to a phenomenal increase of about 2.2 lakh crores this year. The malnourishment that we have been seeing among our children, and which has been highlighted in the 15th Finance Commission also, has been taken on board. So we have a special thing on nutrition. Then about water supply, the clean air that we were all talking of in most parts, the urban Swachh Bharat, and the vaccine, which has got a special bonus there that we have for this year. So this is the health and well-being. Physical and financial capital and infrastructure. I have put a tick here because you will have to compare this with what the industry had set out in terms of the sector-wise requirement that they were looking forward to. So if you look at the manufacturing, the production-linked incentive schemes which they were looking forward, and as designed in the Atmanirbhar package itself, you would see it has been addressed. And the continuity item on which you could discuss is that 1.9 lakh crores has been set forward for manufacturing, and it is for a period of over 5 years. Textiles, there is a new policy that they will have a park for exclusively for exports. But yesterday when I did a bit of checking on the numbers, it looks that overall the allocation towards textiles has actually fallen, not so much, but it has not, it's not in the same Then infrastructure, I mean, that is where everybody is talking about. So this budget can be looked at as an infrastructure budget, totally out and out, because it's on infrastructure development. So you have a new development financial institution, which will be getting upfront 20,000 crores through the bill. And we hope that it will help the real estate sector, basically the construction sector that we are talking of. This again is a coming back to the old forms. If you remember, the ICICI and IDBI started out as these development financial institutions, which again got converted into banks. And so in fact, IDBI is one of those which we want to sell off and close now, but ICICI did well, went forward. But this is going back to that kind of a schema where you would have a separate finance institution to look after infrastructure needs. Then monetizing public infrastructure, operating public infrastructure. So that is what we have looked at, and which was what the industry wanted, that has been addressed. Urban infrastructure in terms of metro, that is has got a allocation of 18,000 crores. So that has been checked. We get a tick there. Then with power, with respect to the revamping of the distribution companies, there has been an allocation, so you can tick that. Much has been talked about this green power. This is the hydro energy mission that they are talking of, and how the renewable energy will be catered to. So there is a policy discussion on that, taking it forward further. So that is a tick that you have there. Then the others is the shipping and the waterways. Again, this is, as the budget document itself specifies, this is an out and out PPP project, the public-private partnership kind of a project, where they want to have a subsidy support, or is also to increase the employment available. Then there is a capital expenditure in both roads and railways. Then about the financial services for the fintech. Insurance, definitely, that they are hoping to increase the FDI from 49 to 74%, with, of course, some qualifications. Bad banks have been brought back, that is Asset Reconstruction and Management Company. And also 20,000 crores put for recapitalization of public sector banks. Startups, yes, there is an incorporation of one-person company. Disinvestment and strategic sale, basically, for all of those ailing public sector companies. We hope that this will be achieved this time, because last year that much of money that they proposed in the budget could not be achieved. And the positive is, of course, some of the schemes that they are asking, which was considered not to be so fruitful, they have tried to decrease those numbers. So the direct allocation from the central to the state level, the central sector schemes, the numbers have been brought down. Inclusive development for this, again, you will, if you read it, you can see that this is all part of the Atmanirbhar package, which has been again reiterated in the budget. So there's nothing new that has not been said in or been acted upon in the last 1 year. And some of these have already been taken up. So migrants, for example, one ration card, the labor codes that we were, which was again in terms of the social security to the gig workers, and the minimum wages, which has been increased, and the employment ESI. So again, this has been done. And then the financial inclusion in terms of Stand Up India that they were saying, the marginal money requirement has been brought down. And money to MSMEs has been put forward, allocated of 15,700 crores. But this is a point with some, in a sense, you can say that the money allotted towards MSMEs has not been as much as could have been desired. So technically, the kind of money that you were looking at as a upfront allocation to MSMEs doesn't seem to have happened in the scale that we were looking at. So that is the point that one of the points of discussion that's been happening on the budget. With respect to the fourth pillar, that is the human capital, there have been some interesting changes, that the schools that were not so taken care of in the mainframe, like Sainik schools and Navodaya schools, have got some backing now, and also the Higher Education Commission. In fact, if you look at the National Education Policy of 2017 and the way higher education is supposed to be tracked and taken forward in this country, this seems to be a good policy decision in terms of how accreditation, registration, and funding will happen, so that there is a scope for an aspirational India where you could have these collaborations and MOUs with the best of the universities elsewhere, and how Indians can take that forward. Of course, it's all again the ifs and buts. The implementation is what everybody is talking about, and this is where the question comes. The fifth one, with respect to innovation and R&D, this again, they have made some interesting changes in terms of the monies that they have on the National Research Foundation and deep ocean exploration, the numbers there. But then this, if you look at it in a with a very microscope kind of a view, these monies are not really very great if you were to look at the kind of R&D expenditure or the allocations that some of the best of the MNCs would put for their research. But you can't compare, I mean, in terms of what the government and the private MNCs can do. The last one is, of course, the minimum government and maximum governance, where they are trying to look at how compliance to the rules and laws can be further be streamlined, and the citizens not harassed, and so they are able to get their work done without really meeting with the officials, but where they have their papers right and they submit it online, and so they're able to manage their state requirements. And of course, there have been some state allocations that have happened to Goa, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, and Kerala, which I have missed here in typing, but Kerala is also one of those states which have got some monies there. Now, this again has been a point which we in some of the reactions that this has been done with elections in mind. But if you look at in that sense, I for one would look at it as positive for the simple reason that this is a political statement. I mean, this is a political document of the government in power, and if there were allocations made to those states, fair enough, because it also means to me that you are trying to strengthen the federal structure, and it is good for us as citizens to ask for it, as also that the elections are not concurrent between the union and the state. So it's better that the states have elections at different times. So then the union will sit up and recognize the requirements of the state sometimes. Otherwise, some of these states would fall off the map. I mean, you don't even know they exist because it's also centralized sometimes. So it's good enough. It's fair enough that you have those state allocations. So looking at direct taxes, no changes at all for a salaried class. Most of what has happened in the past year continues to be there. So I don't need to really go through this in terms of the details, because nothing has changed except that with respect to the second level or the second rung of changes that they would have want to bring about in the way the tax is administered. There have been these faceless tribunals and dispute resolution committees to reduce litigation. And also the last one which I have picked is basically the startups, which can look at another 1 year of tax holiday. Coming to the indirect taxes, if you look at it overall, there has been an increase in custom duties for some and reduction in some. So this is again a mixed basket. And here you could see that there is this protectionist tendency coming into place. And this was discussed even when the Atmanirbhar package happened, because then are you trying to close off outsiders? How much of customs duty can you actually increase? Is it good enough for the country? But then some of these were asked to be done because you would want your local producers to be helped. And so you find there's this kind of a changes that are happening here. So you could see here that the solar panels and cells, the duty is raised so that you can help domestic production. Whereas for the others like iron, steel, textile, chemicals, some of those custom duties have been reduced and some have been corrected for the earlier duties that were there in place. In fact, there is an agricultural infrastructure cess which has been collected, but on an overall net, there won't be any increase. This is to be remembered because a cess levied is not shared with the states. It remains with the union government. So this would be the profile of the budget. The budget size is about 34 lakh crores, and the gross tax revenue that they are expecting is about 20 lakh crores, and the total transfers that for schemes is about 14 lakhs, and the establishment is 20 lakhs. So if you look at it in a broad number itself, how much of money they actually have in hand to do anything, it's just about 14 crores. That is what it is between the budget size and the transfer, which is the non-discretionary expenditures that they have in hand. How much is left over for actual implementation? That would be the hand. So just they're left with just about 14 lakh crores, and so that is where your uh, thing comes as to how much can you actually spend and how much can you plan with that. If you look at this here, the subsidy component itself, out of that 14 that you have in hand, I mean, 14 is what you have in your total expenditure, I mean, scheme expenditure. In that 14, nearly 4 goes towards subsidy. So you are left with about 10. So do you have enough hold on the money that you have to really bring about those big changes that you are talking about? So this is how the composition of the expenditure is in our budget this year. And now if you look at it, you can actually see how much you could try to adjust internally with the numbers that you have. So what is a fiscal composition? To bring it in a very broad manner, in a very simple manner, what I have here is the capacity, the capital expenditure. Definitely there's a big boost in the sense that from an earlier 4.39 lakhs, which they did as a revised expenditure, this year they have reached about 5.54. They have said that the fiscal deficit will be about 9.5% of the last year's GDP. That is, as I said, 1.34 trillion, 9.5% of that. That's the fiscal deficit that you're talking of. And this again, fiscal deficit is generally because of the FRBM Act, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Act that we talk about. And they have not been fetish in that sense of keeping this in check. They have said that they will bring it down to about 6% next year. And over another 3 years, they will reach back to the 3.5 or the 4%. So that way they have been open to the accepting that they can't do much with tax revenues, and so they'll have to borrow. The side effect is that the states will also be left to the market. That is, they'll have to raise their own revenues because only so much can be shared. Out of the tax revenues, about 40% is what you're sharing, 41% is what you share with the states. So out of the left, remaining 60% is what the union will look at. And so if you look at it for this year itself, the gross borrowing that they're expecting this year itself is about 12 lakh crores. So that is the thing, but they expect about and just about a bounce in the tax over a period of time. And the interesting thing is the states have been allowed to also increase their capacity when the capital expenditure on that. Why are they saying that the government is transparent? Of course, every budget has to be transparent. But why is it that this government is saying that this budget has been transparent? Is that they have been able to bring forth the food subsidy on board and trying to do away with any extra budgetary allocation. So we hope that over the year, there won't be any major changes, because we did see in the last 2 years sometimes that there were extra different budget allocations that were happening in the middle of the years. Not only 2020, even the previous year, 2019 also, we had some monies that were tried to be brought together on board. So this table, I thought you could just see the change that you have here in terms of the receipts that had happened from 2016-17. Why is it interesting is November 2016 was when we got the demonetization. 2017 is when we got the GST. 2018 is when there was this bad period of NBFCs. So we are coming with the series, our past record in terms of the way the government has had is not really, we have had an anemic growth prior to the pandemic also. So every year something or the other has been hitting the country. So we do find that the total receipts is not really much that we can have. And if you look at the net tax revenue, that is the state, I mean, at the central level, the rise has not been very high. This is both corporate and income tax. The growth has not been very high, and the non-tax receipts, basically those which are your interest receipts, dividends, and profits that you have, and the dividend surplus even from the RBI again is not really so much that you can. Of course, they haven't said the exact number of the dividend from the RBI this year, but they have taken much of what they could from there. And coming to the capital receipt, either the PSU disinvestment or the borrowings, you say that the disinvestment that they have planned has not really gone on mark, and that again has been tapering off. So hopefully that should be taken care of, and we should be able to improve. So what is a non-debt receipt? Non-debt receipt is basically your the total of the revenue receipts plus the PSU disinvestment. And so we know where we stand in terms of the non-debt receipts. This is a number that we are expecting, 19.76 lakh crores this year. Hopefully, if that V-shaped recovery growth goes beyond 2%, then we should be able to net 2%, what's what I'm saying, then we should be able to achieve a much better thing. This is with respect to the receipts. If you look at the expenditures, now if you look at the expenditure, same thing here again. The revenue expenditure has been this year, definitely you can see that the budget estimates itself is low. They are not actually having a big target. It's lower than last year they had. Interest payments definitely would have gone up because they are having to borrow more. And subsidies, again, they have tried to shrink it by saying that they have brought the food subsidy on board, but you still have the subsidy on petroleum and the fuel subsidy and the thing. And of course, defense, again, defense continues to be the same, though the SM did say that the capital outlay for defense has increased because defense has 4 different heads. And so they said in the capital outlay, there's been much more on the difference. So you find that that again has not been much. But then there is a capital expenditure that has increased from last year upfront, that is from 4.4 to 5.5 lakh crores. That's 1 lakh crore difference that you can see in terms of the expenditure that has been meted out. Now, why is all the, how do we discuss this? There are 2 ways, either it's growth or development. And so the growth pro market, as we could call it, is that you have been pitching for a disinvestment or the privatization, which of course the development analysts would not be very happy with because they think that public sector should be required and it helps you in terms of the way you're taking forward. There are some core industries which should remain in the hands of the government, and that is the public sector that you have. Then the growth is more market oriented because you're leaving people to their own scheme, which is not really true. You need to be a little more socialistic and welfare oriented. Growth is more thinking global of improving trade. Development is thinking local. And growth, they say, is more towards international rating, which to improve our credit worthiness. So this we could have a debate on because trade part is not really what we are looking at. There is a protectionist statement that is happening here. So I'm not very sure about that. So how do you read it? Overall, it's a pro-market message. But if you look at it as an exercise, it's very well taken in terms of, it's a prosaic kind of a situation where you're looking budget as a business as usual. It's a continuous process. There's no surprise element that because everybody is happy and having a sigh of relief because there's no COVID cess. There is a protectionism in trade because you are bringing in customs duty to the fore again. It could be that it has been done to help some of the businesses, but the important point is since you are trying to activate the customs duties, it shows a mindset. That is what people are afraid of, that we are again trying to hold off trade to that extent. So that is what we are, because whereas the Indian exports have been doing well, but the problem is it's more capital intensive than labor intensive. So that is the issue that we have there. Then the whole thing about privatization versus disinvestment, because you find that Is it really privatization where everybody gets a pie of that, and or is it disinvestment which is just going to some hands and it will not be implemented correctly? So the whole exercise is on implementation and execution. But if you were to look at it from a very academic angle, this is a very interesting and well designed budget, in the sense that when we study in economics, we look at it in terms of GDP having two components, consumption and investment, or in terms of consumption and saving. And so savings is what you look at as investment. So there is an indirect route for creating jobs. So your investment happens because of infrastructure creation, and there is a jobs creation. And here in this particular budget, there's no direct transfers. So you are trying to do the increase in GDP, not through consumption, which we did from 1991 onwards. In fact, our the gross domestic savings over a period of time has started to fall. And last year, I'm sure that the savings would have made it even worse. So we really don't have the numbers, but you could expect it around 24, 25%. And that is a pretty low number. And so if you are banking on consumption as a way of bringing us out of this, that is not this budget. This budget is looking at more of resilience of the citizens to be able to stand up for themselves. It does look at a very idealistic mindset where you are thinking that there is a social responsibility and people will start to take care of themselves, act accordingly. And so they will be able to bring back that animal spirits into the market, from the smallest to the biggest of the private sector. And the concept is of crowding in. That is, government has put so much of money into infrastructure sectors. Now it is up to the government has put, so then it's now up to the private sector to come together and start bringing in the money. So there's a crowding in of the investment happening, and that is what we will take forward. Thank you. I leave you at that, trying to bring you that complete picture, and we could discuss if there are any major questions that you would want to look at this. Esarella, is there something that I need to, any questions on this?
Yes, attendees, if you have any questions, you can key them in the panel in your right. So let me read the questions that we. While we take the questions, we prepared a small poll for you. Having listened to Dr. Indra for an hour, let's see. I just wanted to take a pulse of the attendees, like what do you think about the budget? And there are 5 questions in the poll, so you can. It's just a very simple yes or no question. So I'm just gonna launch the polls. You will have it flash in front of your screen, so you can click on yes or no, whatever you think, according to you, is applies to the question. Most of these questions have been discussed during the course of this session. So we still want to take a poll of what do you think? I'm just going to give you another 30 more seconds to answer. All right. So we have 68% that answered yes and 32% that answered no.
Okay.
Okay. Second one. All right. We have for this question, we have about 44% that answered yes and 56 that answered no. Uh, okay, 60, almost 65% believe that this was not a growth budget. Okay. I think, ma'am, this is something that you might have to explain. This is
Yeah.
regarding the CSR funds.
Okay. Okay. Is there any specific question, or should I just talk about it in general? I mean,
So, about yes, like why do you think the budget missed an
okay.
opportunity to
Yeah.
tap?
Yeah, this is what I personally thought about when I discussed the budget and tried to study as to how this budget could take forward. Coming to the fact that this budget has not really looked at the social sectors in terms, of course, healthcare has got a big boost this time. Education is not so much because overall, if you look at it, the kind of allocations and the budget expenditures that the government has been spending on education is in the range of about 3.6 to 4% traditionally. And some years it has been less. It's about 2.5 to 2.8% of the total GDP. And health has always been around 1.2% to about reaching up to 2%. So this year, health has got a boost. It reaches nearly about 4% of the GDP. But I mean, education per se, the numbers have fallen. In fact, it's less than what you would expect it in terms of the expenditure on social sector. So, if one were to look at, and considering that the government has to borrow quite a bit of money for its expenditure overall, CSR funds is a good way which it could have tapped, where the public-private participation could have been brought to fore, in the sense that they could have had some kind of policies where they could have improved the way these funds could have been utilized further, because there are a lot of NGOs and foundations and businesses which have been spending on social sector issues like health, water supply and sanitation, health itself, for example. There are quite a few which are doing it in their own small ways in remote districts and remote areas. So they could have got some kind of a fillip in the sense that their efforts have been recognized, and also that they could be energized to do further in this, because the government alone cannot be doing much of all that we are requiring to be doing in this vast country. So in that sense, I felt maybe the CSR funds could have been used better, or the business organizations would definitely have got a more positive pat on their backs for the work that they are doing, and how they could take it forward in terms of pulling in more money for the overall betterment of the country. Because see, the kind of investment package that has been given by the government this time, and considering the kind of a pandemic situation that we have been through, it has been quite drastic. And so this plan that we have, yes, on paper it looks good, the amount of money that has been put forth, but it will take a lot of time for it to show result. This is an indirect way of doing it. It is not that you're putting money directly into the hands of the people to increase consumption. And coming out of a bad patch where people would have now definitely started to shrink their budgets, because they won't want to spend money so liberally, so easily. There would be more of interest in taking care of their savings that is already there, because the interest rates are pretty low, and so they would want to save. And that you have to make a commitment of being part of the economy to invest and improve your own businesses. Yes, there is a lot of encouragement there, but that lurking fear of failure is what will keep people back. They won't want to go ahead and spend so much of money in the first instance. So to that extent, I thought that this is another way they could have supported the initiatives on the social sector side. That is why I thought about the CSR funds.
Okay. All right. So almost 82% answered yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And one final poll for this session. Okay, I think there's a character restriction. It ends with given the pandemic. All right. 84% have answered yes. So coming to the questions, some of the questions that keep coming is about the for the salary class, right? The tax slabs, but I think none of that was discussed during this current budget session. And I think even Dr. Indra mentioned that during the session that there's no changes when it comes to employee tax slabs. Um, the capital gain task. Mr. Prashant, are you, if you're here, you've asked a question, what about capital gain task? I'm not receiving any response. I think he's left.
Okay.
Um, the top 3 trends in budget expenditure that we are seeing in the current government over the past 7 budgets. Ma'am, do you have anything to say? Yeah.
Yeah, the top 3 trends, in the sense that they have tried to, in terms of the sectoral distribution, if you were to look at it, they have always been firefighting with respect to the receipts that they have. So they have tried to keep the defense expenditure constant. They have tried to keep themselves afloat in the sense of that. That is why we are saying that there hasn't been much of a change between the last three budgets that were given, because that's why I showed you the table on the expenditures right from those 6 years that we had. I mean, that is what just 1 second, I'll just go back to that just to make myself more clear. If you could see this is what the expenditure is. And the period from 16-17 is what we could look at it interestingly, because the anemic growth in our receipts and the troubles that we are facing started from that time, 2016-17, after the demonetization, when the small savers and the small businessmen, the unorganized sector started to be really badly hit. That is after the demonetization. So 2016-17 was demonetization, 17-18 was the bringing of GST, which still has not really settled down. So that is another situation where the government is trying to complete the complete transformation towards GST. 18-19 was a time when the non-banking financial corporations hit a low there, so we had a problem there. Then 2019-20, there was an overall global fall also in the growth that we saw. And in fact, I think China was the only one which had a positive growth of about just about 2.1% at that time. Otherwise, all the economies were doing pretty badly. And then it comes at the back of the pandemic. So the three positive or the three consistent ways has been to keep ourselves afloat with the kind of thing. So they have tried to keep the expenditures in balance. That's all they are trying to say. Even so, the fiscal deficit is what they are aiming at, and that they were very strict about that. There was a fiscal fetish, that is, they wanted to keep it between 3 and 3.5%, and they were not overdoing that. So you really cannot look at sectoral trends in that sense, because it has been low across the board, and that is why you see that they are saying that this budget has been a little more positive in terms of looking at the investment needs more than ever. This was not done before. It was not seen earlier.
Okay. I think we'll take one more question. This is regarding the wage code. Is there anything you'd like to talk about the wage code? The wages code?
No, I think if you look at the way this government has, if you look at the four factors of production, as we say in theory, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, with respect to the labor codes, the four labor codes that they are looking at is what they will start to implement in April of this year. I mean, they were saying January 20th, but I think you are better aware of how much the organization has started to do that. But if you look at it broadly, it is a positive in terms of the wage code, because they're going to have a higher minimum wage. The security in terms of insurance and healthcare will have to be taken care of by the thing. But the negative is what many people are focusing on. The negative is that the other codes with respect to the trade unions and the freedom that will be curtailed of the labor, and how the hire and fire policy will be going forward. But the wage code is what is a positive that we are looking at. But this again, it now depends on how the organizations are going to be taking care of that. Because they also have a higher limit of employees that they can take on board. The earlier one was limited to 100 employees. Now up to 300 employees they can. There is a plus that they have there. So I would say it would be a positive for many of the class of workers as we are talking of. That is the positive that I would look at. I would also look at the positive of with respect to the Startup India and the Stand Up India, because nearly 55% of our workers are self-employed. And in a traditional sense, that is what we would look at as a negative in an economy, that we have not moved towards organized sector. But if you look at it from a counterintuitive position, that is what the investment budget would look at, in terms of saying that let the self-employed people be help further to be able to use the credit available to them. And so you find that now that minimum requirements have been reduced from 25 to 15% in the Startup India. And in the Startup India, they have said that you can have this one-man companies. And so this would be a positive of how it will be viewed in the market and how people are able to take that forward. And so there is a positive in the sense that you are trying to turn the tide of not using that 55% self-employed as being a burden, but actually looking them as the entrepreneurs in this. So that is the second second thing that we would say. So the first one was labor code. The second is that entrepreneurship, which has come. Capital banking, definitely they are trying to improve the liquidity situation, and they're also going to have this development finance assistance that they're going to have, so that capital is taken care of. That is left. All that is left is the land, and there again the land policies have been framed and have been shared with the states. Land is an agriculture and land is a state subject, and you would find that the code that they have is towards better management of data records of the land, digitization of the system. So you are going to have lesser amount of litigation, and that is going to help us in our ease of doing business, in the sense that registering property and things, we were ranking very low in an international standard. So that is another thing that this government has tried to put together in terms of the land. So if you look at the 4 factors of production, again, this is a slow movement towards bettering our factors, so that on the ease of doing business, we should be able to do better overall. That is my position on this.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for taking this time to give us this very beautiful lecture on the budget. It was very simplified, I think, and I think you covered almost all the important points that was discussed in yesterday's budget session. Thank you very much for taking this time and for being with us, for partnering with Adrenalin for this session. And thank you, attendees, for being an amazing audience. If you have any questions regarding the budget, please write to us. You can just reply to the mail that you've received from me. Just send a mail, and I'll ask Dr. Indra to answer them for you, and I will send it back to you. And stay tuned for more such beautiful topics from Adrenalin Thought Leadership webinar series. Thank you, everyone, and have an amazing day. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsa. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.